Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast.
The podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults.
And now, your host, Dustin Jones.
Hello, friends. Thank you for listening to the Senior Rehab Podcast. Today on the show, we have Dr. Michael Puthoff. He is the program director from St. Ambrose University. He has quite the career for himself, a very intellectual individual, has done a lot of research and is influencing students at that school, but also influencing our profession. He has been very instrumental in getting a very exciting conference together, the Exercise and Physical Activity in Aging Conference, which will be July 28th through the 30th of 2016 in Indianapolis, Indiana. We're going to talk about that conference. We're going to talk about his career, some of the lessons learned early on, some of the lessons learned in his research, and then also just the academic perspective. We talk a lot about interest in geriatrics. How can we get students more excited? We've mostly heard that from the perspective of clinicians, not necessarily from the perspective of someone that is in PT school and academia. So it's very refreshing to hear his words. So I know you'll enjoy this conversation, but without further ado, let's get into this. Dr. Mike Puthoff. Dr. Mike Puthoff, welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast. I appreciate your time this morning.
Thanks for having me, Dustin. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so we connected at CSM, I believe, after one of the talks that we were both in, and we got this scheduled. I'm excited to talk to you just because I took a look at your 10-page resume, and it's pretty remarkable, just all the work that you've done. But just your work from the past up until now, your work in academia, I'm really impressed. So I'm excited to talk to you about your career. So if you could you just give us kind of the quick and dirty of your career, where it started and where you are right now?
Yeah, for sure. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, so a little bit down the road from where you're at right now. Yeah. So I grew up there, went to school at Marquette University for my physical therapy degree, and great education up there. And, you mentioned accomplishments, and of course you do that through mentorship you have and great role models. And I had a lot of great role models at Marquette University. All my professors were wonderful there. Graduated from PT school, ended up moving to Omaha, Nebraska for a year. My wife was finishing up law school out of Creighton, and I worked at Legion Health, Bergen Mercy Hospital. I had a good experience. Yeah. I was in that perfect generalist setting.
Man, that's crucial.
Definitely. Awesome. Definitely. So, one day you're on the ortho floor, one day you're in the ICU, one day you're at the skilled center. So I learned a lot that first year. Ended up, we moved to the Quad Cities, Davenport, Iowa, where I'm at right now. And that's where my wife is from. And she had a nice job opportunity. So I got a job here. And this was it was around 2001 that we moved. Okay. And if you followed PT history, this was a few years after the Balanced Budget Act. So okay. the jobs were not there like they were now for new graduates.
Could you go into that situation in terms of the climate of PT?
Yeah. So I graduated in 2000 from Marquette University with my master's, and in 97, 98 it went through, and then the people graduating in the late 90s really struggled to find jobs. When I went into PT school, my father worked for a large healthcare system in the greater Cincinnati area, and they said, come work for us when you graduate. We'll pay for your school. We'll give you this money. And That's how desperate people were to get therapists. And then reimbursement changed for Medicare with the Balanced Budget Act and the cap and all those things that went along with that. And I started as a per diem employee with my first job. I had my clinical internship at one of the Allegiant clinics. Okay. Got on per diem in the hospital setting. Then, luckily for me, someone decided to move. Their spouse had a job somewhere else, and I was able to move into that full-time position. I had classmates, they worked for a year or so as a part-time therapist or a per diem therapist until they could move on to a full-time status.
Huh. That's hard for me to even imagine. Now, it's every day I get 5 emails that any job that I want, I could take, and that's just hard for me to even comprehend, not being able to get a job as a PT. That's interesting.
I tell my students that story, and they just kind of look at you sometimes and don't necessarily believe you.
Yeah.
But we're very fortunate in PT. We've had a lot of ups. We've had a lot of job demand, but every profession goes through ups and downs. And I just happened to graduate near one of those downs.
Yeah.
But I worked in the Quad Cities, and I had a job at a clinic where I did half nursing home work. So this facility or this company I worked for contracted with a lot of the nursing homes in the area. So I spent half my time doing nursing home work, and the other half I was in the outpatient clinic.
Wow.
So again, another good situation, but I started getting the itch to go back to school or get back into academia. And the University of Iowa was just up the road from us in the Quad Cities, about an hour drive away, and explored that, looked into their PhD program. And they have a wonderful PhD program. One of the most well-respected PhD programs in the country for physical therapists to go into. Long history of graduating PhDs.
Wow.
I had a great mentor, Dave Nielsen. He has a background in cardiopulmonary, so he did a lot of research in cardiopulm, body composition, that sort of thing. Okay. Got on with him, worked in his lab. He gave me a lot of freedom, which was nice. I did my dissertation looking at the effect of lower extremity muscle power on function in older adults. And I don't know if you know much about muscle power. I think you probably do. But looking at that influence of how not just force generation, but also how quickly you can generate that force and how that affects function in older adults.
Yeah.
So I got really excited with geriatrics there. At the same time, the job opened up here in the Quad Cities at St. Ambrose University, where I'm at, and interviewed for the job. And they hired me before I had my PhD done. Had, again, some great mentorship at St. Ambrose. Sandy Cassidy, the program director at the time, she actually got her PhD from Dave Nielsen. So there was this really great connection where she understood the training I had from Iowa, and I had a great connection from that standpoint.
Man, so when you were in physical therapy school, what were you leaning towards? What were you kind of interested in at that stage of the game?
I went back and forth like a lot of students do. At least I talk to a lot of my students now, and they think this is what I want to do, and then they go do an internship. No, this is what I want to do. I think outpatient was where I wanted to be when I graduated, partly because I really enjoyed the reasoning process and the critical thinking you had to do.
Yeah.
Someone comes to you, they have this pain somewhere, or they have this problem. You got to really problem solve, work through what's going on with them. That's what appealed to me. But once I got into more acute care and some of these other settings, I did realize you use those skills a lot in those settings too.
Yeah.
So I was thinking more outpatient, but I loved my acute care rotation. I loved my my hospital based. I loved working with older adults. I didn't say this before, but when I came to the Quad Cities, when I worked in the nursing homes, I really did enjoy that setting, working with those populations, and I was beneficial. It was a benefit. I worked in some really nice nursing homes, and not just a nice facility, but nice staff. I think you can be in an old building, but if the staff, it's really the staff that makes the place work.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree. I've been in 3 skilled nursing facilities, and they've all been very different. But it's amazing to see one where it almost feels like family. And the one that I think of was in very, very rural part of West Virginia, and all the staff knew each other. All their kids went to high school together, and the patients. We had patients in their 90s. Some there was a few that were over 100 that knew each other all the way back to elementary school.
Oh, that's great.
So everyone knew everyone. And I mean, it probably fills a lot of stereotypes for West Virginia for a lot of people that are listening right now. But it was just amazing. It was a very, very exciting place to be, which may be surprising, but just really cool to be able to relate to people like that. But then, yeah, like you said, you can have the exact opposite where it can be misery based on certain factors.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to mentorship, like I mentioned before. Is if you're one of those facilities and you're working with therapists who are really committed, a nursing staff, an administration that's committed, it can be a great place to work.
Yeah. So when you were in acute care, when you kind of were jumping around on all the different floors, did you see the value in that while you were doing that job in terms of how that would benefit you down the road?
I told myself there was benefit in doing that. When you're going through the process and you're going from different floors, and I think we all remember what it was like to be a new grad that first year or two, and you're feeling overwhelmed, and you enjoy seeing some variety, but you're also looking for some consistency in your days, so you can recognize some patterns and feel a little bit more comfortable that way. But I would say, now and then that year or two after, I really did value that experience, and it was great to work with different therapists too.
Yeah, and you really,
jumping from floor to floor and get a chance.
Yeah, I agree. I haven't worked in acute care. I just had a pretty awesome rotation, and it was pretty cool just to see how the behemoth of the healthcare system ticks in the hospital. Tell me about kind of the transition. When you really started to become interested in academia and research. How was that process for you?
Well, I think I tell my students this sometimes. I was very naive to the whole process. Like, what does a faculty member actually do? What is it involved? And when you're a student, you think, oh, they just teach, a couple classes, they run some labs, but it looks like a pretty good job, right? They don't seem like they do that much. There's a lot of other things you do to keep a program running. And I'm in an administrative role right now. I'm the program director. Okay. But even before that, there's committees you sit on, there's task force you do. There's a lot of things like that you do. And you mentioned research. I've always been interested in research and think that's vital to what we do as a profession. And I really enjoyed my time at Iowa, where I got that foundation of how to be a researcher, how to ask questions, how to write. Very instrumental. And I can't say enough about getting a PhD and how beneficial that is to learning that process. I'm at an institution at St. Ambrose where we're expected to do research and publish and present, but it's not our primary focus. I would say our primary focus, we're a little bit more of a teaching institution. Okay. That's what our primary focus is day in, day out. But it is important that we all do research and get involved in that. And I enjoy it. It gives you a different perspective. It gives you a chance to learn the literature. Working with research participants is different than working with patients in the clinical setting. Has a different feel to it and has a different focus to it.
Yeah. How's your perception of how we are teaching geriatrics in school? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think it depends on which program you're at and the type of faculty that you have. Ideally, if you can pull together in a perfect world, you pull together a faculty that has interest in a range of different topics and a range of expertise, people with clinical specializations, people with research backgrounds who can come together and work together. I can only really speak for my program or our program, I guess, from that standpoint. I am familiar with other schools, but obviously in the trenches here. One of the things we do, we speak about aging across the whole spectrum and across our whole curriculum. Okay. So it's not just we have this geriatrics course at the end and you do that and that's where it's at. You see geriatrics in everything, almost everything that we talk about, from kinesiology to the cardiopulm class, the neuromuscular class, musculoskeletal. There's those threads in there for sure. I think the key is also we have another class, psychosocial issues and physical therapy. So we sometimes call it the touchy-feely class. We go through and we talk a lot about those issues associated with aging, from how to be a caregiver to the depression to anxiety to all those things that go along that all of our patients experience, but also our older adults, and also talk about the benefits of being old. The things that go along with it, the experiences you get, respecting those experiences. I think if you have a program that overall respects the aging process and respects older adults, it's a good education. What I say sometimes, though, is that it's hard to, how to say this? If you think about what you learn in PT school, you learn a lot of stuff, but it takes a couple years after graduation where you realize why you learned some of those things and why it's important that you learn some of those things. And I think geriatrics is one of those things. You spend a lot of time talking about the aging process and, this functional test or why you do exercises this way. But it's not until you get out and work that population, you say, oh, wow, that's that was why I learned that, or that's why we talked about that. Yeah. And if you look at a lot of the continuing education about older adults out there, many of the topics they talk about are things that are covered maybe in a good DPT program.
Mm-hmm.
But after numerous years of experience and a chance to see older adults, you hear that information from a different perspective, and you can really grow from that information. And we forget a lot that we learn, so it's important to go back and relearn some of those things.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think I'm sorry. Just so you can, if you're a professor, it's important to talk about why you work with older adults, why it's important. I think it's also important to bring in clinicians as lab assistants and guest speakers who can communicate those things too.
Yeah. What about patient interactions? Is that something that you all have utilized in school to demonstrate some of these principles that you're teaching in the class?
Yeah, there's lots of different ways to do that. We do a couple different things in our geriatric module. One is that we take our students out to a local senior center or senior community, I should say, and they come in 1 week, they do a full assessment, work with the client, see their home situation, and then they come back 2 weeks later and actually give them an exercise program. They implement the program and teach them the program.
That's awesome.
But there's other things that we do. Also with older adults, National Fall Prevention Day. Over the last 3 years, we've done a really big screening event with our local senior center called ExPAACII, Center for Active Seniors. They have a big community center that addresses aging across the spectrum. From they have fitness centers, they have exercise classes, they have advocates that help people pick the right Medicare plan. They have a senior daycare centers, probably not the best word to say, but for patients who have dementia but are physically able to do things, a family member can drop them off there. They can receive care for the day while that family member can go out and do other things. Yeah. So we partner with them and we do a big national fall prevention awareness day event and pretty much get all of our students through that. And that's a great experience for them too. Yeah.
I like that. And I like how, you have the emphasis on the experience of working with these older adults, because, it's not, I don't think the value of it and the enjoyment of it can be portrayed, through necessarily a textbook or a PowerPoint lecture, but just being able to actually interact with people, and especially, when you're in their environment is huge. And when I think of the things that made me have more of an affinity towards geriatrics, it's been those real life, tangible experiences that weren't necessarily lectured to me.
I think everyone would agree with that. If in an ideal world, we'd have a hospital or a clinic connected right to our educational environment. We would walk over and see the patients right after you get done learning about them. But we try to mimic that as much as we can, get people in the community and get them interacting with a range of patients.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're doing. I know you have so many things to consider, so many barriers to do the things that you probably would want to do in that ideal world. But it is encouraging to hear people like you in your position that are wanting to change perceptions, which, is a common conversation that we've had on this podcast for sure.
Definitely.
So keep it up.
Thank you. And again, mentorship's the big thing. I have one of my faculty members, colleagues, John Barr. He is the former president of the Academy of Geriatric Physical Therapy, and he's been a really big advocate for our program to do some of these things that we need to do to promote geriatrics with our students.
Awesome. So let's switch gears a little bit. I want to get into some of the research that you've done, which is pretty impressive. I mean, I've got your resume up here, and it just, study after study after study. So I want to get the highlights. What are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned from the research that you've done in terms of, practical highlights for the everyday clinician?
If I go back to my dissertation, and it's been a few years ago now, but we looked at the influence of muscle power on function. And if you think about the evolution of resistance training for our older adults, and I wasn't practicing in the early 90s, but it was only in the early 90s that people started saying, well, maybe we should try some higher intensity exercises with our patients. There were some early studies published in the mid 90s where older adults were doing 70 or 80% of their one repetition max, and that was considered groundbreaking. That and previously it was thought that you'd hurt these individuals doing it. They couldn't tolerate that. But, mid 90s, that research was coming out. And if you look at some of the research with athletes and, healthy populations, I guess, or younger populations, geriatrics seems to be like, 10 or 15 years behind. We do some of this stuff with athletes and healthy individuals, and then someone says, I bet these same concepts would work with older adults, and they do that research, and it's like, duh, right? Of course it'd work with older adults. And I know I'm probably speaking to the choir. I love how you talk about using kettlebells and some of these non-traditional things that older adults typically don't do. But from the power training, that was something growing with athletes, and someone said, well, let's look at this for older adults. And that's something I built off of some of that research done in the early 2000s and added to that. And just finding that idea that if you look at function, you look at everyday activities, there's a speed component to it, right? I mean, it doesn't really matter how much force you can generate in your hip abductors necessarily. When you're falling, it's probably more important how quickly can you get your leg out to catch yourself.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes sense from that standpoint, but it's nice to have that research to look at that and say, speed matters, velocity matters. Seniors are really athletes when you think about it. Their sport is just living, right? Basketball, football, baseball, volleyball, all these things have a speed component, and so does life. So that was something I really enjoyed looking at that power component, that speed component, and how that factors into older adults.
Yeah.
Some of them. Oh, go ahead.
Well, how practically, how would you implement that into? Let's say you've got your little old lady, mid 80s, no major deficits left or right, just kind of generally deconditioned, weak, and a sweetheart. How would you incorporate that in terms of the study? What specific exercise or techniques did you all use to build up that power and speed?
Yeah, so we did a cross-sectional analysis. So we looked at where they were at and then how that related to their gait speed, their sit-to-stand, their walking speed, but also to their self-reported level of disability. But I can extrapolate on that and talk a little bit about what other people have studied and how that applies to your question. What I tell my students, or when I do continuing education, is that when I talk about power training, we're not advocating going out and doing high velocity training with your 95-year-old woman on the first day that you see her. Just like if you're dealing with an athlete, you have to build up a base of strength. You have to make sure they understand the technique first. So what I say is that when you're working with older adults, think about the speed component, but take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, build the strength up, make sure they understand the technique of the exercise, and then add velocity. That can be another component. So let's talk about like sit to stand, for example. You might work on that, and let's say they can do a sit to stand. You might have them do 15 or 20 of them if that's the sweet spot for building strength. And once they're able to do it safely and in a nice pattern, you can have them, in a sense, explode out of the chair. So during the concentric phase, have them say, I want you to stand up as quickly as you can. So have them stand up as fast as they can, and then they can sit back down at a normal speed. But adding that speed component to the sit to stand is a wonderful way to incorporate power training.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you said echoes your previous point of, athletics kind of does something and then geriatrics says, hey, let's try this. That is, basic principle to training athletes as well. Get the form down and then you can build speed on top. And that's pretty neat. I really like just your way of thinking there. And just to think of, it's that type of work is going to benefit athletes, but I'd venture to say it's going to benefit the older adult even more. I mean, that's just totally anecdotal, but just to see what the patterns of their life looks like and their overall speed of their movements throughout the days, just to throw in some of that quick power, whether you're doing a sit to stand or any other basic fundamental movement, that's going to have such a huge impact.
Definitely.
It also makes me think of some of the research with, you just mentioned quickness, the research with tripping.
Yes.
Which just fascinates me to put people safely in a situation where they have no choice but to react and to train that reaction.
Definitely. So, that's the power training stuff. More recently, I've done some studies with cardiac rehab. We have a couple cardiac rehab centers in town, and I teach the cardiopulmonary course. And one of the things I stress to people is that you can't just think about the heart and lungs. You just can't think about aerobic capacity. You have to look at the whole individual and how all the systems work together. And, a little bit off topic, the whole human movement system, that initiative taking place. I think that really speaks volumes. This idea that all the systems have to work together. But looking in cardiac rehab, if you walk into a standard cardiac rehab center, a lot of them just focus on walking, aerobic capacity, getting the cardiovascular system back. And that's very important. But what we did, we looked at what the function was like in these patients. And we looked at sit to stand, we looked at gait speed, we looked at hand grip strength. And what we found is that, while these patients, about 20 or 30% of them were at a level that they had a clear deficit, and we needed to really work with those patients. Almost all of them were below where they should be for their age-specific norms. So you think about, frailty and losing your physiological reserve. A lot of these patients in cardiac rehab, they may not be, frail, or they may be able to do everything that they need to do in their day. But if they don't change something, they're going to be down this road. They're going to be that frail person we see, you're going to see in the home health setting, or they're going to be in the hospital and can't get home.
Yeah.
So our next study, we haven't gotten there yet, but our next study we want to do in cardiac rehab is to say, let's identify the patients in cardiac rehab who are at most risk for developing frailty or having difficulty, and let's give them an added program, or let's adjust their program, be a lot more specific to what they need to see if that leads to better outcomes.
Wow. I haven't spent much time in the cardiac rehab setting. What are you commonly seeing in a session? In cardiac rehab?
Cardiac rehab, yeah. So cardiac rehab, it's not just the exercise. That's what I know I thought all it was before I learned more about it as a student and as a clinician. But they usually start off with a warm up, and they go through. They do some aerobic training. Typically 20, 30 minutes of aerobic. A lot of places use a circuit method. They might do 7 to 10 minutes on the elliptical machine, or 7 to 10 on the new step, and then do some walking or biking. Strength training. Some centers truly believe in the importance of strength in their cardiac patients. Others say, we do a little strength training, and they focus more on the aerobic. And I think that's one place that definitely a lot of cardiac rehab programs could add to is including more strength training. There's this fear that strength training is going to harm the heart, and if you do it in the right way, you monitor it right, you make sure they're not doing a Valsalva, they're not holding their breath. It's really no more stressful on the heart than aerobic training.
Yeah.
Some of them will do balance training. They'll do some general balance training if they really have their act together and they're thinking about that. But then the other thing with cardiac rehab is the education side of things. So educating them about risk factors, lifestyle changes. Typically after a heart attack, someone's going to change their lives for a few weeks, maybe, or a few months. But then unless they know how to incorporate those lifestyle changes, they're probably going to end up right back where they were before.
Yeah, that sounds like me around New Year's.
Yeah, I understand. But it's about motivating them, right? And building that self-efficacy, making them believe they can make these changes, and not looking at it as if it's just a short-term fix. It really has to be a lifestyle change.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, let's get into something that's coming up this summer that I'm excited about. I'm not going to be able to go. I wish I was going to be able to go, but I'll be traveling. But tell me about the ExPAACII conference coming up this summer.
Yeah, so this is a conference sponsored by the Academy of Geriatric Physical Therapy, Exercise and Physical Activity and Aging Conference. And we did this for the first time back in 2010. And I was fortunate enough to be part of the planning team back in 2010. And it really was a great conference. Speaking selfishly, it was a great conference to learn how to develop a conference. I was learned a lot from behind the scenes, and I had a great opportunity to work with other leaders in the profession who helped plan the conference. But
awesome.
The conference itself was wonderful. We had about 400 people there. And you think at CSM, you were at CSM, your first CSM, and there was 11,000, 12,000 people, something like that.
Crazy.
It was crazy. This is 400 people, which is a good number, but they're all committed to geriatrics. They're all committed to working with their older adults, and they're excited about the newest research, the best information about exercise, activity, how to get your patients more active, how to collaborate with other healthcare professions for the benefit of the patient. So I met leaders throughout geriatrics, in 2010 and made some really good relationships in 2010 with the attendees there. So we're repeating this. So we're doing it again. As soon as we got done, people are saying, "When's the next one? When's the next one?" People, and we joked, it's like, "Well, we're not going to do this. This is crazy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work." But we decided to do it again. And University of Indianapolis is where it's held at. They're doing the brunt of the work and coordinating the conference and getting the arrangements. But it's a 3-day conference. In the mornings, we have kind of the keynote speakers or the plenary sessions where everyone's together, and there's different themes each day. There's one theme that's really about physical activity initiatives in America, but also across the world. There's another one about interprofessional care and community management of older adults, which is something I'm very passionate about.
Yeah.
That, as physical therapists, we get how many visits with our patients, 6, 12, 15, something like that. The research shows it takes numerous hours of rehab and exercise to really change someone physiologically. We need to get our patients out in the community setting. We need to get them into community-based exercise programs. We need to get them the support that they need when they're discharged from therapy, or else everything we did is gone, basically.
So
they're just going to go home and sit on their couch. So there's one day is about that, and then the other day is about I guess hot topics or what's new in exercise. One of the topics is power training, something very close to me, and I don't know who suggested that one, but another one's about cognitive. Yeah, I don't know how that happened. Cognitive behavioral interventions, community-based exercises. So there's a range of topics, and I was flipping through it the other day in preparation for our conversation today, Dustin, and just got really excited about the conference again. Looking forward to hearing from all these leaders, not just in physical therapy, but from other professions. We have people from the NIH speaking. We have people from the CDC coming in, people from large organizations in Canada, Australia. People from all over the world are coming to speak at this conference.
My gosh. Do you have many people that you think will come from more of the fitness realm?
We are trying to promote it a little bit more to those individuals. The first time we went through it, we said we wanted to do that, and we just really focused on PTs is how it worked out. This year, we're doing a lot more initiatives to reach out to other professions. So we've reached out to the occupational therapist, of course, American College of Sports Medicine. We're tapping into that.
Awesome.
Some of the other organizations out there that focus on group fitness for older adults have advertised in their publications and have done some outreach that way. So we do hope that we get individuals from other professions there too, because part of the benefit of ExPAACII is the presenters, but part of it is the interactions and the discussions that take place in the smaller sessions and even at the social events that are part of the conference.
Yeah, and I know geriatric rehab clinicians know how to party, so those social sessions will be awesome. I've had so many people email or go through Twitter or Facebook that say, "Hey, a good conference that I could go to. Do we have anything that's talking about exercise in older adults? How are we progressing here?" And this conference always ends up in that conversation somehow, whether I recommend it or someone jumps on a conversation and said, "Hey, ExPAACII, go to this, check it out." It's exciting to see more interest grow in this and to see that there's more of a need for a conference like this. And, I know I could talk till my face is blue on this podcast, but the work that y'all are going to do within 3 days, at this conference is going to be able to reach, many clinicians that will then be able to disperse, that message. And that's exciting. So yeah, thank you for putting the hard work in to get something like this going.
Yeah.
What's the URL for the conference?
Yeah, so it's www.expaac2, the number 2, so expaac2.org.
Okay.
And registration's open right now. I think the early bird ends on April 1st. Okay. People who are APTA members or Academy of Geriatrics get a little bit added discount too for being members of the association.
Okay, April 1st. Don't be late, people.
Don't be late.
That's not a joke, right? There's no April Fools
I don't think so.
Okay.
No one's told me about that. But check the website on April 1st. Maybe there'll be something on there. Who knows?
Yeah. So for people like me that are not going to be able to make it, is there an opportunity to get some of the content, or is there any plans for that?
When we did this last time, we actually had a company come in and record all the sessions, and then they were available on the APTA. Blanking on their continuing education part of their website, where you can buy different things. This year we decided not to do that. We didn't get as much of people purchasing those as the association thought they would. But one thing we did last time, and I think we're going to do this again this year, is that some of our speakers, some of our big speakers, we're going to ask them likely to write a short paper, a short summary of their talk, and publish it in the Geriatric Journal. And that's what we did last year. And we've talked about it. I can't go on the record, I guess, and officially say that's going to happen, but those were nice summaries. And I can tell you, in my geriatrics class, I used those because they were so well written back in 2011 when they were published. Great summaries on community-based exercises, great summary on how to work with older adults with heart failure. So there's some great resources from that standpoint.
Yeah. And I'm going to give you the responsibility to get a Twitter conversation going with this with this conference. Did you utilize Twitter much at CSM?
A little bit. I did kind of follow it a little bit here or there. Not as much as I have at other conferences. A couple of years ago, there was a whole nother conference called the Clinical Education Summit, and we talked about what clinical education should look like in physical therapy. And I really got involved in Twitter there. There were some nice conversations back and forth, and that time I did. This time I kind of watched from more the periphery. I didn't get involved and post many things, but I did enjoy reading many of the tweets out there, and it was actually overwhelming. It was the number of people using it. It was like, I just can't keep up.
Yeah, it's tough to follow that hashtag, but I will ask a big favor if you could, or encourage other people to tweet with the hashtag that you all will use. Would you use ExPAACI? I imagine ExPAACI. ExPAACI, and I think I should have known this before I got on the podcast, right? But I think we said with a number 2 after it. That's what the hashtag. And I'll get on to I'll get on Twitter and confirm that, and I'll put that out there and put you on there too. That'd be awesome, because then I'll feel somewhat like I'm there in spirit and be able to learn a ton.
There you go. And we also have a Facebook page too. So if you can, like us there, and we're releasing different things through Facebook too. So we're trying to use social media in all those different ways.
All right. And for all the listeners, all the links to what we're mentioning is going to be in the show notes for sure. So, all right, let's switch.
One thing about go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, I just wanted to mention the pre-conference too. So on Wednesday, so the conference is that Thursday, Friday, Saturday, the 28th through the 30th in Indianapolis. But we're doing a pre-conference on Wednesday. So for those individuals who might just be starting out in geriatrics, and they look at the speakers and say, well, I don't even know a lot of this background information. How am I going to participate in this conference? There's a one-day pre-conference course on Wednesday where they go through, and we're having a course talking about the different systems. So aging issues in cardiopulmonary, neuromuscular, all through the different systems. This is a great course too for anybody who's thinking about the GCS. It goes through all the different aspects of geriatrics and working with older adults. Great background course. So if someone's thinking, I'm not where I want to be for this conference, come to the pre-conference first, work it in. If you're thinking about sitting for your GCS, that pre-conference course is a great course to attend too.
Man, you're giving me a serious case of FOMO right now. Gosh,
yes,
that's a jam-packed week. That's going to be amazing.
It is. It's a fun week, and I don't want to say it's career-changing. It's kind of a big statement to make, but you leave really excited about geriatrics, working with older adults, and you're just surrounded by people who are excited about it too. So it's the content, but it's also the environment of the conference. Yeah,
I just think of my experience at CSM of how rejuvenating that was to be around just physical therapists. I mean, regardless of the setting and their interests, just to be around people and to have, some of those conversations was amazing. But I can't even fathom what it's like to have people that interested in geriatrics, and just the interactions and conversations and the opportunities, that could come from that. So, man, So I encourage people, check it out. The URL will be in the show notes for that conference. Early bird ends April 1st, 2016. Yep. So
correct.
And then discount for APTA members. So we'll put that in there. So let's shift gears a little bit. We'll wrap things up with some rapid fire questions. Your responses definitely, don't have to be quick by any means.
Okay.
So from your perspective in geriatrics, what could we be doing better for our patients?
From clinical practice side, you mean,
yes,
Justin?
Sir.
Yeah. So I think it's very easy to fall in that trap to think every older adult's exactly the same.
Yeah.
I give my students the example that I'm 40 years old and they're in their mid 20s. When they're 60 something years old, I'll be 80 something years old. Mm-hmm. Sometimes as healthcare professionals, we think everyone 65 years and older is the exact same person. They're all older adults. But my experience is much different. My life experience is much different than some 20-year-old right now. And we grew up in different times and different environments. So don't look at your 70-year-old patient and assume they're exactly the same as your 85-year-old patient, growing up in totally different times and totally different life experiences.
Yeah.
So I think just looking at the person as an individual is one thing. I think the other thing, something I'm very passionate about, is looking at why people are motivated to do what they do. Thinking about some of the behavioral intervention techniques out there, things like motivational interviewing, and that's opening up a whole can of worms there. But we sometimes just think older adults they don't want to do things. They're depressed. They don't want to do their exercises. Honestly, I think they do. They just are afraid sometimes. They don't feel like they can do them safely. They don't believe they're going to make a benefit. But as therapists, we need to ask what motivates these individuals. How can we build their confidence up, and how can we make them, excited to participate in therapy and participate in their health?
That's such a good point. And the easy way out is just to say that they're non-compliant. But like you said, that's not necessarily the case.
It's many times us. We're not communicating the right way, and we're not understanding them correctly.
Good point. So in the field of geriatric rehab, what are you really excited about other than the conference coming up this summer?
I'm excited, part of what we do at St. Ambrose, when a person applies for the program, that we go through an interview process and we interview these individuals. And so we do about 140, 150 interviews a year. And it's a great opportunity to meet people and to get a better sense of why people want to go into physical therapy. But I'm hearing more and more people say that I want to go and I want to work with older adults. I think this is an important part of what we do as physical therapists. And why are they saying that? I think they see that the number of older adults coming in through our society, they've probably had some good role models of successful aging. They've probably seen some people who have not successfully aged and think, wow, if they've gotten therapy or they've exercised or took care of themselves a little bit better, they wouldn't be in that situation.
Wow.
So a lot of times people talk about how physical therapists, new grads just want to go into sports and orthopedics, and a lot of them do. But that's a lot what we do as physical therapists, so it makes sense. I'm sensing that there's more people who want to go into geriatrics and see the value of working with older adults. So I get excited about that when I interact with people coming into PT programs already excited about geriatrics.
That's awesome. I've not heard too much of that, so that's very encouraging to hear that from a program director himself. So that's awesome.
Good.
What would you tell your 25-year-old self, knowing what you know now?
Oh, geez. I think everything happens for a reason. That's kind of vague, I guess. But and things tend to work themselves out. I mean, you may not get the job that you want, or something may not go the right way, or you may have rough days. But you learn from all those things. You grow from all those things. And if you're committed to what you want to do, and you stay focused on those things, and try to learn from every opportunity, things tend to work themselves out in the right way.
Yeah, that's good advice. I would give myself something pretty similar. I think of your first job out, in acute care, of where probably every day wasn't the most pleasant, situation, and wasn't happy every day. But man, you look back on it now, and those lessons are very, very valuable that you got.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and, I think looking at the long run, the overall situation. And, like you said, you can have crummy days and days that aren't that great, but you have to look at the overall experience and what you're gaining from those things.
Yep, good point. What are some of the most useful pieces of technology or apps that you use in your day-to-day work that make your life a little easier?
Mm-hmm. Well, being in more the academic setting, I guess I'm a little bit swayed that way, of course. Calendars, emails, of course, everyone uses those. But one I use a lot is Viddle. It's a app for Viddle. Yes, you can do whiteboard lectures in a sense, or talks. So you can sit there on your iPad. You can draw things out. You can import pictures. You can zoom. You can spin. And a lot of times, if I have students come to me and they say they have a question about something I talked about in class or something from lab, the threshold I use is 3. If 3 people ask me the same question, that means I probably did something wrong. I didn't explain it very well. So what I'll do is that I'll record a quick Viddle and I'll put it up on YouTube, or I'll put it on our Blackboard, which is our classroom management system, and say, here's a quick 5-minute explanation of this thing from class. Watch this video, and a lot of times students tell me they really benefit from hearing it again or hearing it in a little bit different way. So that's one I find I use a lot. Being in academia, again, Blackboard is kind of our class management system. I use blogs, I use discussion boards within that as a way for students to learn different items.
Awesome. Man, Viddle, that would have been useful, because I just think about even I graduated in 2011, so not too long ago, but just some of the forms of communication that we have now. I guess, we had the technology, when I was in school, but it was not easily accessible, or, some of these apps were not necessarily created by that point. Yeah. But to hear some of the ways that we can communicate and make it so much easier, I mean, man, that's awesome.
Yeah, we are in our program. We are pretty much a paperless program. We put everything electronic. Students use tablets in the classroom, in the lab, so they're taking notes on their tablets. They're recording lectures on their tablets. They're using different apps to videotape things and go back and analyze the movements or think about things differently that way. So that pushed us to be a little bit more savvy when it comes to these apps.
Yeah, awesome. All right, last question. Let's say you're at CSM. Or you're at ExPAACII. We could say that as well. You've got every geriatric rehab clinician in the room, and you've got their attention for 30 seconds to a minute. What would you want them to know?
Yeah, for sure. I knew you were going to ask me this question from the previous podcasts, and I kind of gave away my answer already a little bit with the behavior interventions. I think a lot of your guests are talking about the importance of high intensity and pushing your clients, and I would echo that. But how I'd use my 30 seconds to a minute, I would say really try to understand your patients and what motivates them. If they don't want to do the exercises with you, if they don't want to work with you, it's not because they're lazy. It's not because they're not motivated. They are most likely motivated. You just need to figure out what that is. And how do you do that? You listen to them. You figure out how to coach them. You find out what's important to them. Listening is the best thing to do. And then also, they know what to do. I think everyone knows they need to exercise. Everyone knows they need to be active. As therapists, it's not necessarily our role to tell people you need to be more active. It's how to figure out to get the people to be more active and to find value in activity. And I think that's what separates a really great therapist from just kind of your average therapist. That person who can really listen to their client, figure out what motivates them, help them set goals, build their self-efficacy, build their motivation to make some lifestyle changes.
Man, I love that. And that's just so powerful, if you have that skill. And what's really cool about that is, you're a program director at, GCS, your main interest is in geriatrics. And, just last night I had a conversation with Tim DeFrancesco. He's a strength coach for the LA Lakers. He's a physical therapist. And he said the same thing with his athletes.
Oh, great.
Relationships, listening to them, and just kind of being that problem solver of helping them change, their lifestyle, their eating habits, their training. It's the same principle, just applied, to a different setting. So awesome. I love that. So thank you, sir.
Great.
I appreciate your time. All the links are going to be in the show notes for the conference for sure. I would encourage everyone to connect with Mike. He has quite the resume, like I mentioned a couple times before. So, man, such a wealth of information. And I imagine a lot of people are going to want to pick your brain on some of your research topics and probably this conference. Where could people connect with you if they have any questions?
For sure. I can give you my email address and you can put it in the show notes. People are always welcome to email me if they want. I'm not as active on Twitter as maybe some people, but I check it a few times a week. And if people have questions that way, I'm happy to be engaged that way. But probably email is the best way to reach out to me. And you can put that in the show notes because it's kind of a long email address.
Okay. All right. I will include that in there. And yes, Dr. Puthoff, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dustin, and thanks for all you're doing. This is a wonderful podcast, and it's really addressing the importance of geriatrics and working with our older adults. And I hope it keeps growing. And excited about all the guests you've had on, and I will continue to be a listener.
All right, I appreciate that. Hit me. Thank you for listening to the Senior Rehab Podcast. The show notes for this episode and much, much more can be found at seniorrehabproject.com. If you found value in this conversation, please share this with one other person that could benefit. And until next time, do not forget to stay funky.